A young couple vanishes without a trace on the night of their wedding in the summer of 1987, just hours after saying "I do." Aaron and Lily Dalton, full of laughter and love, were last seen leaving their reception in a brand new white Subaru, heading toward their honeymoon cabin tucked deep in the Ozark Mountains. But they never made it. No witnesses, no calls, no sightings. For 16 years, their disappearance sat like a bruise under the town's memory, quietly throbbing, never spoken aloud. Families fractured, suspicions faded, until in 2003, a lone hiker stumbled across something strange in the woods, a half-buried license plate, then a wedding ring, and then what looked like bones. The forest had kept its secret for nearly 2 decades, until that secret finally rose to the surface. The VHS hums before the image snaps into focus. There they are, Aaron and Lily Dalton. He's wearing a white tuxedo with a crooked bow tie. She's glowing in a lace-sleeved wedding dress that looks like it was passed down 3 generations. The camera is handheld, slightly shaky. You can hear someone laughing behind it. Maybe a cousin. Maybe Claire. Aaron twirls Lily once beneath the fairy lights strung up around the barn. There's a smear of cake on his chin. Her veil is caught in the breeze. And in that fleeting, flickering footage, they are every bit the newlyweds they should be. Hopeful, beaming, drunk on love and sugar. It's the last image anyone ever has of them. The tape ends with a glitch, a bright burst of static. And when the screen goes black, it feels final. Hours later, Aaron and Lily were supposed to drive to their honeymoon spot, a quiet, off-grid cabin just outside Harrisonville. They never checked in. At first, no one panicked. Maybe they stopped somewhere. Maybe they decided to elope again for fun. But by morning, the alarm bells rang. The room they'd booked remained untouched. The bed was still made. No calls were made to family. No charges on the credit card. No sign of their Subaru. No trace of them on any highway camera. The police chalked it up to a runaway couple. Maybe they had second thoughts. Maybe it was mutual. Or maybe it wasn't. But Claire Dalton, Aaron's 13-year-old sister at the time, never believed that. Because she remembered something no one else had noticed. A strange man, watching them from the edge of the crowd, dressed too well, too still. And then, just like the tape, her brother and Lily had glitched, out of the frame, out of time, out of reach. The forest was quiet, too quiet for a late spring. Jacob Hensley, a 41-year-old hiker from out of town, had wandered off trail near a forgotten corner of the Ozark foothills, not far from a dried-up stream bed. He was looking for deer sheds, scanning the underbrush with a patient eye and a walking stick. The trees here didn't whisper. They stood still, heavy with decades of silence. Then he saw it, a glint of something dull beneath a sheet of moss. At first, it looked like a bottle cap, but when he scraped away the dirt, more revealed itself. Rusted, rounded edges, numbers, a license plate, Missouri State. The year barely visible, 1987. Jacob knelt lower. His fingers brushed something else nearby. Something soft that shouldn't be there. He yanked back. It was paper, or what was left of it. The waterlogged, half-rotted husk of a photograph, curled at the edges and stuck to a piece of clear plastic. He held it up against the sunlight that filtered through the pines. 2 people, blurry, but unmistakably dressed in wedding clothes, stared back at him. He stepped away and vomited. Within minutes, he was on the phone with the sheriff's office, hands trembling, voice cracking. He didn't know who they were, but he knew. This wasn't some old junk pile. Something terrible had happened here. By nightfall, the clearing was swarmed with deputies, cadaver dogs, and floodlights. Reporters showed up by morning. The Dalton case, once a dusty footnote in Missouri's missing persons files, was now very much alive again. As the forensics team began digging, they whispered about what they'd find buried beneath the roots. But Claire Dalton, she didn't need to wonder. Somewhere deep down, she already knew. Her brother and Lily hadn't vanished. They had been waiting to be found. Claire Dalton hadn't been back to Harrisonville in over a decade. Not since the funeral, not since her mother's second heart attack. But when the sheriff's department called to say they'd found something, there was no hesitation. She packed a single bag and drove 8 hours straight through the night, barely blinking, eyes fixed on the highway like she was chasing a ghost. Now 29, Claire walked different than she used to, more like her father, shoulders tense, eyes sharp. But as the town's old signs crept into view, "Welcome to Harrisonville" established, 1837. Something in her chest tightened. This was where she had last seen her brother. Aaron had kissed her on the forehead that night, tux still on, and told her she was the prettiest girl at the wedding. She'd teased him about his crooked tie. He'd laughed. That was the last real memory she had of him. Clear, untainted. 16 years had passed since then. 16 birthdays. 16 Christmases where 2 seats sat empty. 16 years of Claire asking herself the same question every night. What if I'd noticed more? What if I'd said something? She had tried to forget. She really had. After the media faded, after the search parties ended, after her mother stopped sleeping and her father left entirely, Claire had buried her grief the only way she knew how, studying forensic psychology, trying to understand the darkness that steals people in the middle of the night. She told herself if she could decode it, she could undo it, but she never could. Now, as she stood on the edge of the clearing where that rusted license plate had surfaced, watching deputies with flags and markers dig up the forest floor like archaeologists of some forgotten crime, the smell of pine and earth almost made her dizzy. A young deputy approached her. "You're his sister?" he asked softly. Claire nodded, her voice caught in her throat. The deputy hesitated, then added, "They think they found the car. And maybe more." Claire didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she stepped forward, boots crunching over the dead leaves and damp moss, and whispered to herself what she had whispered every year on Aaron's birthday. "I told you I'd find you." Harrisonville hadn't changed much. That was the first thing Claire noticed as she drove through the town square. Same rusting diner sign, still flickering. Same faded awning on the bakery her mom used to love. The same crooked mailbox outside the church that had once held her brother's wedding. Everything suspended in time, like the place had never moved on from 1987. Except it had. Just not in the ways that mattered. At the motel, the clerk barely made eye contact. When Claire asked about the sheriff's department, he muttered something about new hires and disappeared into the back. When she stopped by her childhood neighbor's house, Mrs. Hawley, the sweet old woman who used to bring pecan pie over on birthdays, the woman peeked through the curtain, recognized Claire, and didn't answer the door. Claire could feel it, not in what people said, but what they didn't. The air here was tight, heavy, like everyone had agreed a long time ago to shut their mouths and let the memory rot. At the gas station, 2 teenagers stared at her like they knew who she was. One nudged the other and whispered, "That's the Dalton girl." Claire turned. They looked away. But not fast enough. She drove to the sheriff's office, only to be told the lead investigator was out on a call. When she asked if they had the dental records matched, the deputy behind the desk fumbled his papers and said, "We're not releasing anything yet." It wasn't incompetence, it was fear, or guilt, or both. This town hadn't forgotten what happened. It had buried it, just like the forest did. And now, with everything surfacing again, the people of Harrisonville weren't ready for the past to breathe. But Claire wasn't leaving until it did. It took 6 men and a winch to pull the thing free. The forest didn't want to let go. Roots had wrapped themselves around the undercarriage like fingers. Moss clung to every inch of corroded metal. The windows were long gone, the frame buckled inward from years of slow collapse. But when the earth finally released it, there was no mistaking what it was. A 1987 white Subaru Outback, Aaron's car. Claire stood just beyond the police line, arms crossed so tightly her nails dug into her palms. The moment the vehicle crested the rise on the flatbed tow, she felt something crack inside her. The rust had eaten almost everything. The paint flaked off in chunks, the headlights shattered into hollow sockets. One tire was missing entirely, but the license plate matched. And when the forensic team pried open the passenger door, the stench that came out was thick with mildew and time. Inside, the seats had collapsed inward, fabric long rotted, but tucked behind the driver's seat, someone found a small suitcase. Brown leather, warped with age, but still intact. The brass clasps popped open with a sharp click. A silk slip, white, torn at the hem. A floral headband, the same one Lily had worn at the reception. Claire remembered pinning it into her hair, her fingers trembling with nervous excitement. The forensic tech held up the suitcase lid, and there it was. Stamped into the lining, L.D. Lily Dalton. Claire pressed her hand to her mouth. There were no bones, no remains. Not yet. But they had been here. Together. Long enough to shed pieces of themselves. One of the deputies leaned into the car again, brushing away debris near the center console. Something clattered to the floor, a plastic cassette tape. He held it up, squinting. There was no label, just a faint red smudge on the side and a small crack in the corner. Claire stepped closer. "Bag that," the lead investigator said, eyes never leaving the Subaru. Claire didn't speak, but her eyes locked onto the tape, unblinking. Somehow she knew. It wasn't blank. It wasn't forgotten. It was left there, and it was meant to be found. The audio lab was in the back of the sheriff's building, a small windowless room that smelled like dust and old wiring. Claire sat beside the technician, arms crossed, her heart pulsing in her throat. The cassette had been degraded by time, warped plastic, a bent spool, but with some rewinding, tensioning, and a digital patch job, the technician managed to load it into the player. There was a click, then static. Claire leaned forward. Another click, then a hiss, like wind caught on a cheap microphone. And then a voice. Fragile. Frightened. "Aaron's asleep." Claire's breath hitched. It was Lily. "We left the cabin around 10, took the back roads. I think someone's following us." The tape crackled again, the hiss building like a storm on the edge of clarity. "There's this black truck, no plates, keeps flashing its brights. The sound of a zipper, a breath." Then Lily's voice, more hushed now. "I told Aaron we should have told someone, about the motel, about Blake, but he said we'd handle it. I think this is bigger than us." Claire gripped the edge of her seat. Blake. That name hadn't been said in 16 years, not since the rumors, not since the night Lily found him outside the church and screamed. The technician paused the tape. "There's more," he said quietly, "but it gets worse." Claire nodded. "Play it." The tape clicked again. "If anything happens to us, it wasn't an accident," Lily whispered. "We didn't just run away." There was a faint sound in the background, distant bells. Then, something louder. Tires on gravel. A voice, male, distorted by the low-quality mic. Claire could only make out 2 words. "Get out." Then chaos. Wind. A scream. And silence. The technician stopped the playback. His hands were shaking slightly. Claire sat frozen. That voice. It wasn't Aaron's. Someone else had been with them that night. Someone who didn't want them to make it out of those woods. She stood slowly, staring at the now silent cassette deck. This wasn't just a clue. It was a message from the dead. And someone had gone to great lengths to make sure it was buried for good. Claire spread the contents of the wedding box across her motel bed like sacred relics. The VHS tape had been transferred to digital years ago, but she still had the original, labeled in her mother's handwriting, Aaron and Lily, June 13th, 1987. She pulled up the video file on her laptop and hit play. There they were again, dancing beneath string lights, Aaron's goofy grin lighting up the frame, Lily's head resting on his chest. Claire let the tape run until it reached the final scene, the cake cutting. Then she rewound, slowed the playback, watched closer. Something had been bothering her. A flicker in the corner of her memory. A face. At 1841 into the footage, she paused it. There, barely visible behind a cluster of guests near the barn doors, stood a man. Dark suit, hands in pockets, unsmiling, watching. Claire squinted, rewound, played again. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, eyes locked on Lily. Who was he? Claire opened the envelope of rehearsal dinner photos. Most were grainy, disposable camera prints. But one caught her breath. It was a candid shot of Lily laughing with her bridesmaids, caught mid-giggle, eyes squinted with joy. But in the background, blurred but clear enough, the same man, standing near the edge of the parking lot, not smiling, not joining in, watching. Claire felt her stomach twist. He wasn't a guest. She'd gone over that list more than once. This man didn't belong at the dinner, or the wedding. She zoomed in again, his posture, his stare. It wasn't curiosity, it was fixation, and he was always in the background, just out of reach, just close enough to see them. Claire sat back, the laptop screen casting a pale glow on her face. Who was this man? And why had he followed Aaron and Lily across 2 nights? Without anyone noticing? She didn't know yet. But she was sure of one thing now. Someone had been hunting them. And the wedding wasn't a celebration. It was the start of something far more sinister. The motel still stood, barely. It looked like it had been forgotten on purpose. 2 stories of peeling white paint, overgrown hedges, and a flickering neon sign that now just read, Mo. E. Claire parked beneath the sagging awning and stared at the building for a long time. She hadn't been here since she was a teenager, but she remembered the stories, whispers at school. Something about Lily being spotted there once, alone, just days before the wedding. No one ever confirmed it. No one dared ask. But Claire was done being polite. The front office smelled like bleach and mildew. A thin man with a ponytail and yellowing eyes looked up from behind the desk. "Can I help you?" Claire slid a photo of Lily across the counter. She would have stayed here in June 1987, room 8. The man frowned. "That's a long time ago." Claire held her ground. "Do you keep old guest records?" "Not that far back," he muttered. "Place changed hands twice." Claire took a breath, then pulled out an envelope. Inside, a scanned copy of a folded receipt. Faded but legible. A tip someone had mailed anonymously to her mother years ago, after the news stopped covering the case. She laid it flat. The motel's name. The date. June 12th, 1987. Room 8. And the signature. L. Dalton. But what made Claire's skin go cold was the scrawl below it, added in shaky ballpoint pen. "Monsieur Blake." She looked up at the manager. "This is your handwriting?" He blinked. "No. But that's my father's. He worked here back then. Kept notes on paper receipts." Claire nodded slowly. Her throat felt dry. Do you know who Blake was? The man shook his head. But Claire did. Blake had been Lily's ex, a man from her past everyone thought she had buried long before the engagement. Rich, controlling, obsessive. He'd shown up once at the church in the spring, causing a scene. Aaron had almost punched him. After that, Lily never mentioned him again. Until now. Claire stared at the receipt, her hands trembling. Why would Lily check into a motel the night before her wedding? With him. And worse. Had she gone willingly? She suddenly felt like she was looking not at a receipt, but a warning. And someone had tried to erase it. Claire took the rehearsal photo to the sheriff's office. She wasn't asking this time. She was demanding answers. The deputy at the front desk didn't recognize the man in the photo. Neither did the rookie detective assigned to the case. But when Claire said the name Blake Morgan, something shifted. The air changed. The older sergeant behind them, gray stubble, quiet eyes, glanced at the picture and froze. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. Claire didn't blink. "My brother's wedding. Rehearsal dinner, June '87. The sergeant looked again, closer. "That's Blake, Blake Morgan. Used to drive a black Dodge Ram with tinted windows. Real estate kid from out of state. Dated Lily for a while. We had calls on him back in the day." "Calls?" Claire asked. "What kind of calls?" "Disturbances. Loud arguments. Neighbors heard shouting. Lily reported him once. Said he wouldn't leave her alone. But no charges stuck." Claire felt her skin crawl. "And after the wedding?" The sergeant's mouth tightened. "He left town, 2 days later. Told folks he was going back to Dallas for business. Never came back." "And no one followed up?" Claire's voice rose. "No one thought to ask why a known stalker disappeared the same weekend my brother and Lily did?" Silence. Finally, the sergeant said quietly, "We were told the couple ran off. That it was personal, not criminal." Claire stared at him. "Told by who?" He didn't answer. She turned, stormed out into the bright sun of the parking lot, her hands shaking. The pieces were shifting now. Too many coincidences to ignore. Blake wasn't just a bad memory. He had been there. He had watched. And he had vanished with the same eerie precision Aaron and Lily had. But unlike her brother, no one had ever searched for Blake Morgan. Not until now. The door to the sheriff's office slammed open hard enough to rattle the blinds. Claire didn't wait to be announced. She marched straight past the front desk, past the startled deputy trying to call her name, and into Sheriff Raymond Holloway's office. He looked up from a stack of papers, brow furrowing beneath his thinning hair. "Miss Dalton." "You knew," she cut him off. "You knew about Blake Morgan." The sheriff exhaled slowly, setting down his pen. "Take a seat." "I'll stand." He gave her a long look, then leaned back in his chair. "That case was dead before we even got started," he said finally. "No witnesses. No evidence. Just a missing couple and a whole lot of rumors." Claire stepped forward. "Blake's name was on the motel receipt, the night before the wedding. His face is in 2 photos. He was there, watching them." "That doesn't prove anything," Holloway said. She slammed the photo down on his desk. "He was obsessed with her. You had reports. You knew he had a history." The sheriff's jaw clenched. "He came from money, lawyers. He threatened to sue, said we were harassing him, and then he disappeared." Claire's voice dropped, bitter and low. "So you let it go?" Holloway didn't answer. She leaned closer. "Did my mother know you buried this? That you stopped asking questions because it was easier?" For a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Not guilt, but discomfort. Like an old man who'd made too many compromises and finally saw one staring him in the face. "I didn't bury anything," he said, "but I stopped digging." Claire's hands trembled. "Well, I'm digging now, and if Blake had anything to do with what happened to my brother and Lily, I'll find it." The sheriff didn't stop her as she turned to leave, but as she reached the door, he spoke softly behind her. "You should be careful, Miss Dalton. Some people in this town don't want the past unearthed." She didn't turn around. Then they should have buried it deeper. Claire hadn't stepped into the attic since the week after her mother died. It was like stepping into a time capsule sealed in grief. The old pull-down ladder creaked under her weight, and the air smelled of cedar, insulation, and dust. Her flashlight beam cut through the dark, brushing across cardboard boxes labeled in her mother's shaky handwriting: Christmas, Claire's school stuff, Aaron's room. And then, tucked behind an old trunk, she saw a faded white shoebox, yellowed with age. No label. She hesitated. The lid lifted with a sigh of stale air. Inside, ribbons, some pressed flowers, a dried corsage, and beneath them, folded sheets of pale blue paper brittle at the edges. Her breath caught. Lily's handwriting. The first letter was dated 3 weeks before the wedding. "Dear Mrs. Dalton," it began. "I'm writing because I don't know who else to talk to. I love Aaron, I do, but I need to know the truth. Is he still seeing her?" Claire froze. Her chest tightened. The second letter came a week later, more frantic. "He says it's over, but something doesn't feel right. I saw a car parked outside the shop again, same as before. I didn't want to believe the rumors, but now I'm not sure." The third was dated only 5 days before the wedding. "I'm scared, and I feel stupid writing you again. I don't want to call off the wedding, but I also can't marry someone who's lying to me. Please, if you know anything, please tell me." There was no return address, no response. Claire sat back on her heels, her mouth dry. Her mother had kept them, never told anyone. Why? Because she didn't believe Lily? Or worse, because she did. Claire's fingers shook as she refolded the last letter. Who was her? Not Lily. That much was clear. Aaron had been hiding something too. And if Lily had any doubts that close to the wedding, what if they had something to do with why she disappeared? Claire felt like the floor was falling away beneath her. Everyone had secrets, even the people she loved most. And the past, it seemed, wasn't finished talking yet. Claire found Janine 3 towns over, running a quiet flower shop on a sleepy street where the air smelled of mulch and lavender. She didn't expect much, maybe denial, maybe a slammed door. But when Claire walked in, Janine froze behind the counter like she'd seen a ghost. "Claire Dalton," she whispered. "You look just like your mother." Claire stepped forward. "You knew who I was the second I opened the door," Janine swallowed. "I've been waiting for this for years." She led Claire into the back room, past buckets of lilies and eucalyptus, and shut the door. There were no chairs. They stood, awkward and tense, amid the scent of funerals and weddings. "I need the truth," Claire said. "About you and Aaron." Janine didn't argue. She sat on the edge of a crate and looked down at her hands. "It wasn't serious. Not at first," she began. "He came in for flowers and we talked. He was kind. Lonely, I think. This was before Lily. Before he proposed." Claire didn't interrupt. "He said he wasn't ready," Janine continued. "That he didn't want to get married, not yet. And then, suddenly, Lily was everywhere. And the ring came out of nowhere. He stopped calling. Stopped coming by. I assumed it was over." Claire's heart pounded. "But it wasn't?" Janine hesitated. "He came to see me the week of the wedding. Said he was having doubts, that it was moving too fast. He looked like hell." Claire's mouth was dry. "Did he say anything about Lily?" "He said he still loved her," Janine said. "But that he felt trapped, that he hadn't told her everything. I asked him if he was going to call it off." Janine's voice dropped. "He said he might." Claire stared at her, jaw clenched. "He planned to cancel the wedding?" "That's what he told me. 2 days before," Janine whispered. "But then, he vanished." And I thought maybe it was my fault. Maybe he ran because of me. Claire shook her head, stunned. No, you didn't make him run. Because now it was clear. Aaron hadn't just had enemies. He'd had regrets, secrets, people he hadn't told the truth to. And one way or another, they had all followed him into that forest. The journal was buried behind rows of paperbacks in the attic, hollowed out inside a worn copy of Wuthering Heights. Claire didn't find it until she was cleaning out the last of her mother's boxes. The book felt heavier than it should. When she opened it, the middle had been carved clean. A perfect square, just big enough for a thin, leather-bound notebook with a pink elastic band. Inside, Lily's handwriting. Neat, looping, the kind of cursive girls are taught in Catholic school. The first entries were mundane, flower arrangements, dress fittings, notes about cake flavors. She wrote about Aaron's laugh, the way his hands shook when he was nervous, how she wanted the reception to feel like a movie. But then the tone changed. A week before the wedding, Lily wrote, "Something's off. Aaron comes home late. He says he's just working, but he doesn't smell like work. He smells like lilies, not mine." Claire's breath caught. She flipped forward. Saw her car again, parked across from the florist. Maybe it's just my imagination. Maybe I'm making monsters out of shadows. And then, 2 days before the wedding, he didn't come home last night. I want to believe him, I do, but I saw the look on his face when I asked about her. He went quiet, that kind of quiet that hides things. Claire kept turning pages, her hands trembling. Then she found the final entry. The ink was darker, like Lily had pressed harder. The words slanted. If he still loves her, maybe I never knew him at all. I don't want to run, but maybe I have to. Claire sat down slowly, the journal still open in her lap. So Lily knew. Not everything. Not what would happen in the woods. But she knew Aaron had secrets. She knew something was unraveling. And she had been scared. Not of commitment, not of marriage, but of being a fool in front of the world. Claire stared at the final sentence, reading it again and again. Maybe I have to. Had Lily planned to leave? Or had someone else made the choice for her? Because love, Claire was learning, had never been the problem. It was silence. And silence had been the deadliest thing of all. The cabin was hidden beneath a canopy of moss-draped oaks, 20 minutes off the main road, down a dirt path so narrow it nearly swallowed Claire's car. The real estate agent, a weary-looking woman named Denise, waited beside the gate, holding a clipboard and squinting at the overgrowth. "We found the lease during a property audit last week," she said. "Signed in 1987, under your brother's name." Claire's stomach turned. "Aaron leased this?" Denise nodded. "Just for the summer. Never paid past the first month." They walked together up the uneven stone path. The cabin stood like a secret frozen in time. Its wood siding grayed by weather, windows streaked with years of dust. A wind chime creaked from the porch, eerily out of place in the stillness. Inside, the air was stale. Mice had gotten into the walls. Dust hung like fog. But Claire barely noticed. Her eyes scanned the space. The unmade cot, the rusting sink, the battered suitcase still half-zipped near the wall. And then she saw it. A shoebox on the floor, tucked under a collapsed end table. Inside, photographs. Old Polaroids. Grainy, water-stained. The first was of Lily, sitting on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were red, her mouth open, mid-sentence, or maybe mid-plea. The next photo, her hands were tied. Claire's breath caught. In the background, behind Lily, barely in frame, a man stood in shadow, holding something, a hunting knife. Claire's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the table for balance. Her mind reeled, stomach churning with something colder than fear. She flipped through the rest. There were 6, each more haunting than the last. Lily never looked into the camera. She looked just off to the side, toward whoever was telling her not to move. "Jesus," Denise whispered behind her. "Is that—" Claire didn't answer. She couldn't. The timestamps at the bottom of each photo showed the same date, June 14th, 1987, the day after the wedding. So they hadn't disappeared after the reception. They'd made it here. At least Lily had. But she hadn't come willingly. And now, Claire knew. Someone had brought her here. Someone who wanted to break her, and who had made sure she'd never leave alive. Claire found the photographer listed in an old wedding registry, Paul Henley Productions. The kind of small-town side business that died quietly in the 90s, but his number still worked. He remembered the wedding immediately. "Oh yeah, the Dalton wedding. Beautiful night, real sweet couple," he said, his voice crackling over the line. "I packed up around 9, I think, right after the bouquet toss." Claire's fingers tensed around her phone. "You sure about that?" He chuckled. "Pretty sure. I had another job the next morning. Left before they even cut the cake." Claire paused, then asked, "Do you still have the negatives?" There was a long silence. "Well, I might." 2 hours later, Claire stood in his cluttered garage studio, the air thick with dust and faded memories. Paul pulled out a yellowing photo envelope from a plastic bin labeled Dalton 87. Inside, dozens of prints, untouched since they were developed. Claire flipped through them quickly. The ceremony, the dancing, Lily laughing. Then she saw it. A photo taken on the gravel lot behind the barn. It was grainy, tilted slightly, like it had been snapped in a hurry. The timestamp read 11:06 p.m. Aaron and Lily were outside. Lily looked furious, mouth open, hand raised as if mid-argument. Aaron stood with his back partially turned, one arm around a duffel bag. A car sat behind them, packed. They weren't celebrating. They were leaving. Claire looked up at Paul. "You said you left at 9. He blinked. I must have mixed up the timeline. Maybe I hung around longer than I thought." She stared at him. "Or maybe you stayed because something else happened. Something you never told anyone." Paul looked down at his shoes. Claire turned back to the photo. The moment frozen there, in black and white, was electric with tension. Something had gone wrong that night, something big enough to make Aaron and Lily pack their bags and walk away from the party early. But someone had caught them, and whoever it was, wanted that argument to be their last. Claire had just gotten back to the motel when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, voicemail. She hit play. A man's voice, warped, distant, like he was calling from the edge of a storm. "You're close." But it wasn't just them in the woods that night. Click. No name, no number, no second message. Claire sat down hard on the edge of the bed, pulse pounding. She replayed it. Again. Again. The voice was familiar, but distorted, like someone trying not to be recognized. But it wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning either. It was a nudge, a puzzle piece. She opened her laptop, pulled up the digital map of the Ozark forest clearing where the Subaru had been found. Aaron and Lily's car was recovered on a ridge near an old logging trail. The sheriff's department had only searched the immediate 100-yard radius. Claire zoomed out. There were old service roads nearby, barely marked. One in particular branched off west toward a dried-out creek bed. She remembered the tip she'd read in a 1987 police report. A faint tire track found leading away from the main site, never followed up, dismissed as unrelated. But now... It wasn't just them in the woods that night. Claire stood, grabbed her keys. She didn't know who had sent the message, or why they waited 16 years to say something. But someone else had been out there, watching, listening, or worse, helping. And if she could find where they stood, maybe she could see what they saw. The lab called just after sunrise. Claire, groggy and sleepless, nearly dropped her phone fumbling to answer. On the other end, a tech from the regional crime lab sounded far too awake. "We have a match," he said. "The hair from the passenger side floor mat. It's not Lily's, not Aaron's either." Claire sat up. "Then whose?" A pause. Then, "Veronica Hale. Reported missing from Branson, March 1986. Claire blinked. That was over a year before Aaron and Lily vanished. "Exactly," the line crackled. "She was never linked to your brother's case. Different county. No known connection." Claire's heart pounded. Until now. She pulled up the old case on her laptop. Veronica Hale, 22, waitress, last seen leaving her shift at a roadside diner off Highway 76. Disappeared without a trace. No body. No suspects. Case frozen in time. Claire scrolled further. There it was. Veronica had filed a restraining order 6 weeks before vanishing. The name, Blake Morgan. Claire's blood ran cold. Veronica and Lily had never met. Different towns, different circles. But they had something in common. A man who didn't take no for an answer. Claire stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Blake had done this before. And the reason no one linked the cases? Simple. He'd picked women who didn't know each other, who wouldn't talk, who, when they vanished, left behind no evidence that tied back to him. Until now. That hair hadn't survived by accident. It had survived because something wanted to be found. A single strand. A whisper in the silence. And now, 2 women, once just missing persons on separate police forms, were suddenly part of the same story. Claire's story. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something much darker than a love triangle gone wrong. Claire hadn't expected much from the bank, especially not after all these years, but the clerk, a woman in her 60s with soft eyes and an aging desktop, recognized the Dalton name. "Your mom used to come in here every Friday," she said. "Always carried a red coin purse. Sweet woman." Claire nodded, trying not to crumble at the mention. "I'm looking for anything linked to Blake Morgan. He and Lily, they had some kind of joint account, or at least shared access." The woman hesitated. "That's not public record." Claire lowered her voice. "This is connected to a police investigation, a possible homicide. Please." Something in the clerk's expression shifted. Wariness, maybe, or guilt. After a pause, she clicked her mouse, tapped a few keys, and squinted at the screen. "There's one record," she said. "June 16, 1987, a $9,000 cash withdrawal, joint account, Blake Morgan and Lily Dalton, closed the same day." Claire's breath caught. "That was 2 days after the wedding," the clerk nodded. "Also, this." She slid a printout across the counter. A single transaction, dated and time-stamped. Claire scanned it with shaking fingers. June 16, 1987, 3:14 p.m. Branson Branch, cash withdrawal, $9,000 below that. June 16, 1987, 5:47 p.m. Kansas City Regional Airport, one-way ticket to Mexico City Blake had run, but not before draining nearly every dollar from the account he shared with Lily, an account she likely never knew existed. Claire stood frozen. Her thoughts spiraled. If Lily was dead by the 14th, who signed for the withdrawal? And if she wasn't, was she forced? Claire gripped the edge of the counter, nausea rising in her throat. Blake hadn't just disappeared, he'd cleaned his tracks, with her money, her name, and maybe her blood on his hands. The past was no longer whispers, it was screaming. And now Claire knew something for certain. Blake Morgan didn't just vanish, he escaped. The house was too quiet. Claire hadn't stepped into her childhood bedroom in over a decade, not since Aaron's disappearance turned it into a mausoleum for the life they all used to have. The posters were still on the wall, curling at the corners. Her twin bed sat untouched, the same faded quilt folded neatly at the edge. She closed the door behind her, locked it, and finally let go. The sob hit her hard, shuddering from somewhere deep in her chest. She collapsed onto the floor, knees folded, palms over her face. Not just grief. Grief was familiar. This was something more corrosive. Betrayal, confusion, helplessness. Her mother had hidden letters. The sheriff had buried leads. Blake had vanished like smoke. Aaron had lied. And Lily had walked into the forest and never come back. Claire wanted to scream, but she didn't. She reached for her bag instead and pulled out the cassette player, the first tape, the one they'd salvaged from the Subaru. She hit play. Lily's voice filled the room again, softer this time, less like a recording, more like a memory that had grown teeth. If you're hearing this, don't believe what they say. Don't follow us. We're trying to stay ahead. Claire had heard this part before, but this time, she listened closer. There, under Lily's breath, beneath the static, a sound. She hit pause, rewound, pressed play again, eyes closed. There it was. Bells. Not church bells. Not music. Something smaller. Familiar. She leaned closer to the speaker. Wind chimes. Claire's eyes flew open. She remembered. The cabin. The porch. There had been wind chimes, one creaking above the door, a hollow, mournful sound like forgotten time. She rewound the tape again. At the precise moment, Lily whispered, "We shouldn't be here." The chimes clinked softly in the background. Lily had recorded it inside the cabin, not on the road, not fleeing. She had been held there. Claire sat upright, every nerve in her body alight. This tape wasn't a warning. It was a breadcrumb. And somehow, Lily had left it behind not just for anyone, but for her. The chapel stood like a skeleton on the edge of town, all broken stained glass and sagging stone, its bell tower leaning like it was whispering secrets to the wind. Claire hadn't been back here since her confirmation, but the building had changed since then. It had aged, curled in on itself. The yard was overgrown, the front doors hanging crooked from their hinges. Inside, the pews were warped with moisture, and sunlight poured through shattered windows and dusty shafts. But Claire didn't come for memories. She came for the bell tower. It was something Lily had mentioned once in passing. "When I was little, I used to sneak under the stairs at St. Bridget's, thought it was a portal or something. At the time, it was just a childhood anecdote, but now?" Claire climbed the narrow staircase, the wood creaking beneath her feet. At the top, the bell hung rusted and still, but to the left, hidden behind the crumbling organ pipes, was a small iron latch built into the floorboards. She knelt, pulled. The trapdoor groaned open with a puff of cold, earth-scented air. Beneath it, darkness. She shone her flashlight down. A stone spiral stairwell curved into the earth, damp, narrow. Claire descended slowly, the walls slick with moss. At the bottom, a cramped stone basement, maybe 15 feet wide. The walls were blackened with smoke. In the center, a scorched pile of ash and twisted metal. She stepped closer, a piece of lace, burned nearly beyond recognition, but still delicate. A button, a charred shoe heel, torn fabric, and something else. A small warped ring, melted at one edge but still glinting in the light. Claire knelt and lifted it carefully. Engraved inside, just visible through the soot, a +L. Her hands shook. It was Lily's wedding ring. Claire stared at the pile. This hidden room beneath a place of worship. The silence was heavy, almost reverent. Someone had brought things here to destroy them, to erase what had happened. But they hadn't succeeded. Not completely. This wasn't just an old basement. It was a tomb, and someone had once stood right here, torch in hand, praying the past would never rise. Claire stared at the envelope in her hand. It had arrived at the motel front desk just after midnight. No return address, just her name scrawled in black marker. Inside, a cassette tape, newer than the first, clearly stored with care. She borrowed the sheriff's audio tech again, the same man who had enhanced tape number 1. He looked exhausted but curious. "Let's see what your ghost wants this time," he muttered as he fed the cassette into the machine. The static started first, then footsteps, gravel underfoot, and then Lily. "Are you sure no one followed you?" The voice was sharper than on the first tape, frayed, nervous. Then a second voice, a man's, not Aaron. "I parked 3 miles out, cut through the trees." Claire leaned forward. She didn't recognize it. Not Blake, not anyone she'd met so far. "You said this was important." "It is," Lily whispered. "I shouldn't be here. I don't even know why I came back." More silence, wind, a creaking door. Then, "He doesn't know I'm here." "Aaron? Don't tell him, please. He can't know." Claire's heart dropped. The voices dropped to a whisper, hard to make out, like they had moved deeper into the room. There were rustling papers, something metallic clinking. Then the man again. "If you don't tell him, I will. Number you won't." The tension crackled louder than the tape hiss. "This isn't just about me anymore. He lied to me. About everything." Claire's blood ran cold. What was Lily hiding from Aaron? And who was she trusting instead? Then something strange. The faint sound of a Zippo flicking. A pause. "Promise me," Lily said. "If I don't make it out, you'll burn it." "Burn what?" Claire sat frozen as the tape clicked to a stop. She turned to the tech. "Can you isolate that second voice?" He nodded slowly. "Might take time. Might not work." Claire stood, her chest tight with a terrible knowing. There was a second man in this story. Not Aaron, not Blake. And Lily had trusted him with something so dangerous she'd rather die than let it reach her husband. Claire didn't want to believe it, not at first. But the files were real. She found them in a sealed envelope inside a rusted lockbox at the back of her mother's closet, tucked beneath a stack of insurance papers. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. "Claire, if you ever go looking." Her mother had known. Inside were printouts, grainy faxes, official-looking seals, letters stamped with confidential, property of the U.S. Department of Justice, and stapled at the top, Dalton, Aaron, person of interest. Claire sat on the bed, heart pounding, scanning the words she never expected to read. Subject involved in unauthorized wire transfers from Dalton Tech Ventures LLC to offshore accounts registered in Belize and Curaçao. Link established between shell corporations tied to known laundering networks. The date of the report? June 10, 1987, 3 days before the wedding. Claire blinked hard, as if that might undo it, erase the black ink and make the nightmare go away. But it didn't. Aaron, the kind, smiling brother who danced barefoot with Lily in the barn, had been hiding something far more dangerous than cold feet. He was under investigation by the FBI. And if Claire had to guess, Lily had found out. She opened another envelope labeled Confidential Witness Interview Transcript. Inside, a typed statement from a woman named Dana McCall, Aaron's former secretary. He was stressed, kept saying things like, "If this gets out, I'm done. We're all done." Said he'd cleaned it up, but I don't think he had. I asked about Lily. He said she didn't know anything, and she couldn't. Claire's stomach churned. So maybe the wedding wasn't just a celebration. Maybe it was a cover, Aaron trying to look clean, to bury his mess under the illusion of love. And when Lily learned the truth, she may have become the one person who could destroy him. Claire stared at the papers spread across the bed like bones. Aaron had secrets, big ones. And maybe Blake wasn't the only man who had motive to silence Lily. The man's name was Richard Boone, retired federal agent, 33 years with the Department of Justice, now spending his days in a worn cabin 2 hours north of Springfield, feeding ducks and watching the river drift past like it had nowhere else to be. Claire showed him her badge, not a real one, just the broken pieces of truth she'd collected. When she said Aaron Dalton's name, Boone didn't even blink. He just motioned for her to sit. "I always knew this day would come," he said, voice rough with age and cigarettes. "Didn't think it'd be you." Claire pulled out the file. "You investigated him?" Boone nodded. "Aaron got mixed up with a tech company laundering overseas money. Didn't start it, but he knew. And once you know, you're part of it." Claire tightened her jaw. "So what happened?" "Aaron was scared. He came to us, wanted to cut a deal, said he'd testify against the others, but needed protection for himself and his fiancée." Claire's heart thudded. "Lily?" Boone looked her straight in the eye. He loved her. That much was obvious. Said if anything happened to her, the deal was off. Claire leaned in. "But he never testified." "No," Boone said quietly. "We had a meeting set for June 15th, 1987, the morning after his wedding." He took a long breath. "They never showed. No call, no car, no bodies." Claire whispered, "And you thought he ran?" Boone didn't answer right away. Then finally, "We did. We assumed he got cold feet, decided testifying wasn't worth the risk." He paused. "But now?" He looked at her, really looked. "Now I think someone made sure he never got the chance." Claire felt it settle over her like ash. Aaron had tried to fix things. He was flawed, yes, reckless, dishonest. But he hadn't been planning to run. He was planning to come clean, to protect Lily. But someone else had found out, and ended it before he could speak. Claire stood to leave. Boone touched her arm gently. "Be careful digging around in this," he said. "Truth's got a funny way of burying the people who find it." She looked him in the eye. "Then I'll bring a shovel." It started with a midnight knock at a trailer just outside Little Rock. A man named Daniel Kessler, former business partner of Aaron's, long vanished from public record, was hauled out in handcuffs, barefoot and dazed, blinking against the flashing lights. His name had surfaced 3 times in Claire's investigation, once in an old wire transfer, once in a company ledger with offshore ties, and once, faintly, in the background of Lily's rehearsal dinner footage. But Claire hadn't connected him until Boone mentioned one specific phrase. He called someone Danny that week, said Danny was helping him clean things up. The authorities moved fast. Under pressure from the DOJ and a resurrected cold case file, Kessler was charged with obstruction of justice and disposal of human remains. In the interrogation room, Claire watched from behind the glass, arms crossed, breath caught somewhere in her throat. Kessler sat hunched, eyes bloodshot, fingers twitching as he finally broke. "I didn't kill him." "Then what did you do?" "I helped move the bodies. That's it." Silence. Then, "Blake told me they were dead already. He said it was an accident," said Lily, panicked. Aaron tried to stop her. There was a fight. She hit her head. He made it sound like it was no big deal. "So why move them?" "Because he said we'd all go down if someone found them. The money, the deals. He said everything was tied up in Aaron. And if it all unraveled, I'd go down too." Claire stood frozen. He wasn't lying. Not entirely. But he wasn't telling the full truth either. She didn't believe the accident story, not for a second. But the admission cracked the case wide open. They weren't just missing. They'd been moved, buried, hidden. protected. And now, finally, someone had said it out loud. The search team moved in just after dawn. Fog coiled around the tree trunks like breath, and the woods held their silence like a secret. Claire stood behind the yellow tape, arms folded, boots soaked through from dew. The spot had been pinpointed using a crude map recovered from Kessler's confiscated storage unit. Nothing but a hand-sketched square with the word marker circled twice in red. And now, under that moss-covered oak, the soil gave. The ground was dense with roots, tangled like veins over the grave. But the dogs had led them here without hesitation, whining, circling, pawing at the same patch of earth again and again. Shovels struck something soft just after the 3-foot mark. Then, a crack, not stone, not metal, bone. Gasps rose from the crew. One of the officers whispered a prayer. The lead investigator, a woman named Mara, turned to Claire, her voice low. "You might want to step back." Claire didn't move. She watched as they pulled away the last of the earth, revealing what time had tried to swallow whole. 2 bodies, one larger, Aaron, almost certainly. The other smaller, fragile, curled inward. They were buried together, knees bent, twisted toward each other. Aaron's arm was looped around her waist. His hand, though skeletal, still gripped something small and glinting. A wedding ring. Lily's. Claire's breath caught in her throat. And then, as a second tech gently brushed soil from Lily's remains, they found the other clue. Fabric. Torn. Pressed between her clenched fingers, a strip of ivory satin, the hem of her wedding dress. Claire couldn't hold back the tears now. After 16 years, the forest had finally given up what it hid. They hadn't run. They hadn't vanished. They'd been buried together. In the place Blake thought no one would ever think to look. Beneath roots. Beneath silence. Beneath layers of time and denial and rot. Claire knelt at the edge of the grave, her hands trembling. And for the first time, she whispered their names aloud into the morning stillness. Aaron. Lily. It wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was something close to peace. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Claire just stood there, staring down into the dirt, where her brother's bones lay in the fetal curve of death, hand forever locked around Lily's, jaw frozen mid-word, or mid-breath, or mid-prayer. The world narrowed to a point. The voices of the officers faded, blurred like underwater echoes. Someone tapped her shoulder. Someone else said her name. Once. Twice. More urgently. She didn't answer. Her legs buckled. The ground rushed up to meet her. The sky twisted sideways. And then, silence. When she opened her eyes, it was to the hard plastic brightness of an ambulance ceiling. An oxygen mask hovered just above her chin. A medic was calling her name gently. "Claire, you fainted. You've been out for a few minutes." She blinked slowly, her face damp with sweat, her fingers still curled like fists. She turned her head toward the window, where trees blurred by under a rising morning sun. But all she could see was the hole in the earth, her brother's spine, the curve of Lily's neck. They were kids. They had just gotten married. They hadn't deserved this ending, the cold, the rot, the silence. Claire let the tears slip free now, quietly. Not sobs, not fury, just surrender. Because this wasn't justice yet. It was just truth. And truth, she'd learned, didn't heal. It hurt. Truth dug graves. The medic offered her water. She shook her head. She didn't need anything. Just to breathe. Just to get out of this ambulance, to stand again on the earth where they had laid. And to finish what she came here to do. Because someone still needed to be held accountable, and she wasn't going to let this be the ending. Not yet. The key was found in Blake Morgan's personal effects, buried in a false bottom drawer of a rusted tool chest in the back of his old lake house. A single brass safety deposit key wrapped in wax paper with a bank name Claire didn't recognize. She drove there the same afternoon. The clerk gave her a long, skeptical look, but with the tip-off from Boone and a warrant signed just hours earlier, they opened the box. Inside, one thing: a VHS tape, no label, just dust and dread. Back at the sheriff's office, Claire sat in a dark room as they slid it into an old VCR. The screen flickered to life. Static. Then the grainy image of a man in shadow, backlit by a single desk lamp. Blake. Gaunt. Sweating. Eyes sunken. The camera was close. Intimate, like he'd set it up alone in the middle of the night. "If this gets out," he muttered, "then I guess I'm gone. Or dead. Or both." He laughed, dry, empty. I loved her, Lily, from the second she walked into that damn coffee shop. And she always looked past me, always looked at Aaron, like he was something better. He sniffed, rubbed his face, looked into the lens. But I could have made her stay. I tried. Silence. She said no. She said she was going to tell him everything, and I couldn't let her walk out again. A long pause. Then the whisper, "I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to stay." Claire felt the air drain from the room. On screen, Blake leaned forward until his face filled the frame, broken, twitching, somehow both furious and afraid. "I buried her by the oak. I didn't want to. I stayed until it got dark. I held her hand. I said I was sorry." Then black. The tape ended. No date, no location. Just truth, finally spoken. Too late to save anyone, but not too late to bury the lies. The suitcase had sat unnoticed for decades. Cracked leather, rusted zippers, its corners frayed by time. It was recovered from the cabin weeks ago, but only now, as evidence was being recatalogued, did someone notice the lining was loose. Claire sat in the evidence room, gloves on, when the officer handed it to her. "I think there's something inside." She peeled the fabric back. A folded piece of paper, yellowed and soft at the edges, slid out like it had been waiting. No envelope, no address, just a page, handwritten in Lily's neat cursive. Claire unfolded it slowly. The letter wasn't long. "I don't know if this will ever be found, but if it is, please know. We tried. We really did. Aaron made mistakes, big ones, but he was trying to make them right. We were trying to leave, but the past, it caught up faster than we could run." Claire swallowed hard. Her eyes blurred. "If I don't make it, if you're reading this, tell my parents I love them. Tell Claire I remember the bracelet she gave me the night before the wedding. I wore it, even though it didn't match the dress. I wanted to start over. I wanted something real. But people don't like when you walk away from their secrets. Whatever happened to me, it wasn't my choice. But I'm not afraid anymore. And if you're reading this, it means someone didn't let me disappear." "Thank you," Claire pressed the letter to her chest. 16 years. So many lies. So many sealed boxes and lost recordings and burned pieces of truth. But this was Lily's voice. Lily's last breath on the page. She hadn't gone quiet. She'd just been waiting to be heard. Claire folded the letter gently, placed it back inside the suitcase. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a detective. She felt like a sister. The church bells rang for the second time in 16 years. But this time, no one wore white. No rice thrown. No champagne. Just silence. And wind threading through the cemetery oaks like a prayer too tired to speak. Claire stood beside the twin coffins. One oak, one pine, resting side by side beneath a veil of cloud. A photo of Aaron and Lily, sat between them, sun-faded, pulled from their wedding VHS, her head on his shoulder, his tie crooked, both of them glowing with a joy that now felt more like foreshadowing than celebration. The town had gathered. People who hadn't spoken in years now sat shoulder to shoulder, heads bowed, not in reverence, but in regret, because they all remembered that wedding, the dancing, the laughter, the way Lily twirled like she was floating, the way Aaron looked at her like she was his whole life. And then, nothing. For 16 years the town had whispered. They ran. They wanted out. They were selfish. They were hiding something. But now they knew. Aaron hadn't disappeared. Lily hadn't left. They were taken, piece by piece, silenced by a man who couldn't accept that love wasn't owed. A man who watched them dance and decided they didn't deserve a future. The pastor said a few words about truth, about grief, about how some stories don't end when we want them to. They end when someone refuses to stop looking. Claire didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped forward and placed something on Lily's coffin. A thin silver bracelet. The same one she gave her the night before the wedding. The one Lily wore under the lace sleeve, too loose for her wrist, too young for the occasion, but perfect all the same. It was time to let it go. The sky rumbled. A breeze lifted the hem of the casket cloths, and for a moment, Claire imagined she could hear Lily's voice again, soft, amused, always a little braver than her. "We made it after all, didn't we?" Claire nodded once, not to the past, but to the future, to the truth, finally heard, to a wedding that finally had an ending. The sun was beginning to sink when Claire returned to the cemetery alone. No cameras, no press, no questions. Just her, the wind, and the two headstones now standing side by side, etched in clean stone, finally bearing names instead of question marks. She sat cross-legged in the grass, the letter unfolded in her lap. Lily's words still smelled faintly of cedar and dust, the edges soft like worn cotton. Claire cleared her throat and began to read aloud. "I don't know if this will ever be found." Her voice cracked, but she kept going, word by word, line by line, as if reading it aloud made Lily less gone, as if giving the letter a voice would bring the past full circle. "You weren't just a bride," she whispered. "You were brave." Claire paused. "Let that line hang. You stood up to men twice your size," she said softly. "You uncovered things I didn't even know my brother was tangled in, and you still tried to protect him." She looked up at the headstones. Wind tugged at her hair. "You didn't run away. You ran toward something, toward truth, toward light, even when it got you killed." A pause. Her breath caught in her chest. "I'm sorry it took me this long to find you." She folded the letter again, slowly, reverently, and placed it under a smooth stone between the graves. Then she stood, looked out across the quiet, amber-streaked horizon. "Rest now," she whispered. "You're not forgotten, and you're not unfinished." And with that she walked back to the road, back to her car, back to the world that kept moving, now a little heavier with truth, but lighter too, because silence no longer held their names. Claire had broken it, and that was enough. Justice didn't arrive in a courtroom gavel or a perfect headline. It came in fragments, fractured and uneven, like the lives it left behind. Blake Morgan never stood trial. 3 days before his arrest warrant was signed, he was found in a motel room outside Tulsa, an empty bottle of bourbon on the nightstand, an old pistol on the floor. No note, no final words, just a newspaper open to the story of the grave they found in the forest. Daniel Kessler was sentenced to 6 years for obstruction and abuse of a corpse. He pleaded guilty. No appeals, no fight. He stared at the floor as the judge read the sentence. Claire watched him leave in handcuffs, his shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear into himself. There were no cheers, no victory speeches, but there was silence, different from the kind that lingered before. This silence wasn't filled with fear. It was the silence of something finished. Claire stood outside the courthouse alone. The sky was overcast, the air cool. She didn't feel closure, not really. But she felt something else. Space. A clearing in her chest where the ache used to live. She took out her phone and pulled up the last photo of Aaron and Lily. Grainy, joyful, taken minutes before their wedding. She tapped the screen once and whispered, "You're not missing anymore." And that was enough. Justice hadn't come clean, or fast, or whole, but it had come, in pieces. And Claire had collected everyone,